The moment you stop reacting, toxic people lose all power over you. The Stoic way to disarm toxic people does not begin with confrontation. It begins with understanding a truth that most people miss. Toxic behavior feeds on reaction. Without reaction, it starves. Without resistance, it collapses. Stoicism teaches that no person has power over the mind unless that power is handed over willingly. Insults, manipulation, provocation, these are not weapons by themselves. They only become weapons when the mind accepts them as such. The Stoic does not fight toxicity directly. The Stoic removes the battlefield entirely. Toxic people seek control over emotions, control over attention, control over peace. They thrive on visible impact. When anger appears, when frustration rises, when explanations are offered, power is transferred. Stoicism teaches the opposite approach: withdraw emotional consent. Epictetus said that people are disturbed not by events, but by the views they take of them. Toxic behavior is an event. The disturbance is a choice. The Stoic learns to pause between stimulus and response. In that pause, power is reclaimed. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is not weakness. It is strategy. When no emotional reward is given, toxic behavior loses purpose. The Stoic understands that not every action deserves acknowledgement, not every comment deserves defense, not every provocation deserves response. This is the first disarmament, refusing to react impulsively. The second Stoic strategy is clarity of control. Stoicism divides life into two categories: what is within control and what is not. Other people's behavior does not belong in the first category. Opinions, attitudes, intentions, these remain external. Energy wasted on external control leads only to frustration. The Stoic focuses inward: character, discipline, reason. These remain untouchable. When attention stays anchored to inner governance, toxic people find no leverage. Attempts to provoke feel like shouting into empty space. Another powerful Stoic method is emotional distance without hostility. This is not avoidance out of fear, but disengagement out of wisdom. The Stoic does not need to prove strength. Strength is already present in restraint. Marcus Aurelius wrote about acting without hatred, without anger, without bitterness, even toward those who behave poorly. This does not excuse behavior. It simply refuses to let it infect the mind. Toxic people often expect opposition. Calm detachment confuses them. It denies them the conflict they seek. Boundaries play a crucial role here. Stoicism supports firm boundaries without emotional drama. A boundary is a statement of values, not an argument. It does not require explanation, justification, or negotiation. It simply exists. When boundaries are violated, consequences are applied quietly and consistently. No lectures, no emotional speeches, just action aligned with principle. This consistency dismantles manipulation faster than any confrontation. Another Stoic insight is seeing toxic behavior as weakness, not power. Stoics view harmful actions as symptoms of internal disorder. A person at peace does not seek to disturb others. Understanding this reframes the interaction. Compassion replaces resentment. Detachment replaces anger. This perspective does not invite closeness. It invites clarity. When behavior is understood as a reflection of inner chaos, it loses its personal sting. The Stoic stops taking poison personally. Patience is another weapon the Stoic wields without drawing blood. Time exposes patterns. Time reveals intentions. The Stoic does not rush to judgment or reaction. Observing quietly often reveals more than arguing ever could. Many toxic people reveal themselves fully when given space to continue speaking. The Stoic listens without absorbing, observes without engaging, learns without reacting. This awareness becomes protection. The Stoic also practices selective engagement. Not every relationship deserves full access. Not every conversation deserves energy. Choosing where attention goes is an act of self-respect. Withdrawal is not retreat, it is strategic positioning. Inner peace becomes the ultimate shield. A calm mind cannot be easily manipulated. A grounded presence cannot be easily shaken. Toxic people sense this stability and often lose interest. Without emotional leverage, influence disappears. Stoicism teaches that dignity is not defended loudly, it is maintained quietly. When the Stoic refuses to be dragged into emotional chaos, power dynamics shift naturally. Control returns to where it belongs within. There is also humility in this approach. The Stoic does not assume moral superiority. Instead, the Stoic accepts human imperfection, including personal flaws. This humility removes the ego from conflict. Without ego, provocation finds no target. Freedom arrives when approval is no longer sought. Toxic people often use validation as currency. When self-worth comes from internal standards rather than external reactions, manipulation loses effectiveness. The Stoic way is not dramatic. It is subtle, calm, consistent, powerful. No shouting, no revenge, no endless explanations. Just clarity, restraint, and self-mastery. When reaction disappears, control disappears with it. When attention is withdrawn, influence fades. When inner peace is protected, toxicity becomes irrelevant. This is how the Stoic disarms without fighting, not by overpowering others, but by mastering the self. And in that mastery, no toxic person holds power ever again. Toxic people gain power the moment a reaction is given to them. This is not because their words are strong, but because emotional response turns their behavior into a tool. Anger, defensiveness, frustration, and the need to explain all signal that the attack has landed. Stoicism teaches that the first and most important line of defense is not confrontation, but restraint. When reaction is withdrawn, the entire dynamic changes. Every provocation follows a predictable pattern. A comment is made, a gesture is delivered, a boundary is tested. In that instant, there is a space small but decisive between what happens and how it is received. Most people fill this space with impulse. The Stoic protects it with awareness. This pause is where power is reclaimed. Nothing external can force a response. Only habit can. Stoic philosophy reminds us that emotions are not commands, they are signals. Feeling irritation does not require acting on it. Feeling offense does not require retaliation. When emotions are observed rather than obeyed, they lose their authority. The Stoic does not deny emotion, but refuses to be governed by it. This refusal alone disarms many forms of manipulation. Reaction feeds toxic behavior because it confirms influence. The goal is rarely truth or resolution. The goal is impact. When impact is absent, motivation fades. Calm presence creates uncertainty in those who seek control. When no emotional reward appears, provocation begins to feel pointless. Silence, when intentional, communicates more powerfully than argument ever could. Withholding reaction is not passive, it is an active discipline. It requires mastery over impulse, ego, and the desire to be understood. The need to defend oneself often arises from insecurity, not injustice. Stoicism challenges this impulse by asking a simple question: Does this moment truly require a response or only restraint? More often than not, restraint is the wiser choice. Emotional neutrality also protects clarity. Reactivity clouds judgment and pulls attention away from what matters. By staying composed, the Stoic preserves the ability to observe patterns, intentions, and consequences. This awareness provides leverage far greater than emotional outbursts ever could. Those who react reveal themselves. Those who remain calm see clearly. There is also dignity in non-reaction. Dignity does not announce itself. It is felt in the steadiness. Presence. When insults are met with calm, when manipulation is met with silence, when pressure is met with composure, authority naturally shifts. The Stoic does not demand respect. Respect emerges from self-command. This approach also prevents escalation. Toxic dynamics thrive on conflict cycles. Reaction invites retaliation. Retaliation deepens resentment. Stoicism breaks this cycle at its source. Without fuel, fire dies. Without reaction, conflict dissolves. Peace is preserved not by winning arguments, but by refusing unnecessary battles. Importantly, withdrawing reaction does not mean tolerating harm. Stoicism does not advocate submission. It advocates intelligent distance. One can remain calm while choosing to disengage, to set limits, or to walk away. Reaction is emotional chaos. Action is deliberate choice. The Stoic acts without emotional turbulence. Over time, consistent non-reaction reshapes relationships. Patterns become visible. Those who rely on manipulation often move on when influence is unavailable. Those capable of respect adjust their behavior. In both cases, the Stoic remains protected. The greatest freedom lies in realizing that peace does not depend on others behaving well. It depends on internal discipline. When reactions are governed by reason rather than impulse, no external behavior can dominate the inner world. This is the quiet power of Stoicism. Not control over others, but sovereignty over the self. When reaction is withdrawn, control is reclaimed. And in that calm authority, toxic influence loses its grip entirely. One of the most liberating lessons in Stoicism is the clear division between what can be controlled and what cannot. This distinction is not philosophical theory meant for quiet reflection alone. It is a practical tool for daily survival in difficult human interactions. Toxic people often exhaust others because energy is spent trying to change their behavior, their opinions, or their attitudes. Stoicism cuts through this. Struggle by stating a simple truth. Another person's actions are not yours to command. The moment this is truly understood, a heavy burden lifts. Frustration is born from misplaced responsibility. When someone believes it is their job to correct, convince, or reform others, disappointment is inevitable. Stoicism teaches that responsibility ends at the boundary of the self. Thoughts, choices, values, and responses belong within that boundary. Everything else exists outside it. Toxic behavior exists in the external world. It may be irritating, unfair, or even harmful, but it remains beyond direct control. Attempting to manage it through force of emotion leads only to resentment. The Stoic does not waste effort pushing against what cannot be moved. Instead, attention is redirected inward, where influence is real and lasting. This inward focus strengthens stability. When character becomes the primary concern, external chaos loses its ability to disrupt. The Stoic asks not how others should behave, but how to remain aligned with reason and virtue regardless of circumstances. This shift removes the emotional dependency that toxic people often exploit. Control over the self creates consistency. When reactions are guided by principle rather than provocation, behavior becomes predictable in the best sense. This reliability frustrates manipulation. Toxic people thrive on emotional volatility. Calm self-governance denies them that advantage. Another benefit of this Stoic distinction is clarity. When energy is not wasted on external control, mental space opens. Patterns become visible. Intentions become clearer. Decisions are made from understanding rather than anger. This clarity allows for strategic action, including disengagement when necessary. Disengagement is not avoidance born of fear. It is a rational response to what lies outside control. Choosing distance from harmful influence is an act of self-respect. Stoicism does not require endurance of abuse. It requires wisdom in choosing where effort is applied. Focusing on internal control also dissolves the need for validation. Toxic people often manipulate through approval and disapproval. When self-worth depends on external opinion, vulnerability is created. Stoicism builds self-worth on inner standards. When approval is no longer currency, manipulation loses effectiveness. There is also peace in accepting limits. Acceptance does not mean agreement. It means recognizing reality as it is, rather than as one wishes it to be. This acceptance prevents emotional exhaustion. Fighting reality drains strength. Working within it preserves it. Stoicism encourages preparing the mind for difficulty rather than being surprised by it. Human imperfection is expected. Poor behavior is anticipated. When it appears, it no longer shocks or destabilizes. Expectation reduces emotional impact. This philosophy does not promise a world free of difficult people. It promises a mind that remains free despite them. By focusing only on what can be governed internally, the Stoic remains composed even in imperfect conditions. Over time, this discipline builds quiet confidence. Confidence not rooted in dominance, but in self-trust. Knowing that peace does not depend on others behaving well creates independence. Independence creates strength. The Stoic path teaches that freedom begins where misplaced control ends. When effort is invested only where influence exists, energy is conserved, clarity is sharpened, and emotional sovereignty is restored. In this way, toxic behavior loses its power not because it disappears, but because it no longer dictates the inner state. The Stoic remains steady, grounded, and untouched, guided not by the chaos of others, but by mastery of the self. Silence and calm are often misunderstood as weakness, but in Stoic practice they are deliberate expressions of strength. To remain composed in the face of provocation requires discipline, awareness, and control over impulse. Toxic people expect resistance, explanation, or emotional exposure. Calm denies all three. When noise is met with stillness, the dynamic shifts immediately. Most conflict escalates not because of the original action, but because of the reaction that follows it. Words are exchanged, tones rise, egos clash, and clarity disappears. Stoicism interrupts this cycle by teaching that not every stimulus deserves a response. Silence becomes a filter. Calm becomes a boundary. Together they prevent unnecessary escalation. Intentional silence is not avoidance. It is a conscious decision to preserve mental order. The Stoic understands that energy is finite. Spending it on pointless arguments weakens focus and drains strength. By remaining calm, attention stays anchored to what truly matters: reason, values, and long-term outcomes. Calm presence also exposes the nature of provocation. When emotional reactions are absent, toxic behavior stands alone, unsupported. It becomes visible for what it is rather than disguised by mutual hostility. This clarity allows the Stoic to observe rather than absorb, to assess rather than react. There is psychological power in composure. When others lose emotional control, they surrender authority over the situation. Calmness maintains authority. A steady tone, relaxed posture, and measured words communicate self-command. This presence often discourages further provocation without a single word being spoken. Stoicism does not demand silence in every situation. It demands discernment. Silence is chosen when speech would serve ego rather than wisdom. Calm is maintained when emotion would distort truth rather than express it. This selectivity turns restraint into a strategic tool. Another strength of calm is that it protects integrity. Emotional reactions often lead to words and actions that are later regretted. By staying composed, the Stoic avoids self-betrayal. Actions remain aligned with principles rather than momentary feelings. Toxic dynamics rely on emotional exchange. Calm disrupts that exchange. When no emotional fuel is provided, engagement loses momentum. Over time, repeated calm responses reshape expectations. Those seeking reaction grow frustrated. Those capable of respect adjust their approach. Calm also creates space for boundaries. Boundaries delivered in anger invite conflict. Boundaries delivered calmly establish clarity. When expectations are stated without emotional charge, they carry weight. Calm boundaries are harder to challenge because they are not reactions, they are decisions. Silence further protects dignity. Dignity is maintained not by defending every insult, but by refusing to descend into disorder. The Stoic does not need to prove worth through argument. Worth is demonstrated through restraint. There is humility in this approach. Silence acknowledges that not every misunderstanding needs correction, not every opinion needs challenge. This humility removes the ego from conflict. Without ego, provocation finds no anchor. Calm also fosters patience. Time often reveals truth more effectively than confrontation. When the Stoic waits, observes, and remains composed, patterns emerge naturally. Manipulation exposes itself. Intentions become clear. Patience becomes insight. Importantly, calm does not mean passivity. Action can still follow, but it is deliberate rather than impulsive. Distance may be created. Access may be limited. Consequences may be applied, all without emotional turbulence. The Stoic way values long-term peace over short-term victory. Winning an argument often costs inner balance. Silence preserves it. Calm protects it. These are not retreats, but investments in stability. In practicing calm and silence, the Stoic builds an inner refuge. External noise may continue, but it no longer penetrates. This inner stillness becomes a constant, reliable defense. Through calm, power remains internal. Through silence, control is retained. Toxic influence fades not through confrontation, but through irrelevance. This is why Stoicism values calm not as avoidance, but as mastery. Boundaries are essential in dealing with toxic behavior, yet they are often misunderstood as confrontational lines drawn in anger. In Stoic practice, boundaries are calm expressions of self-respect. They are not emotional reactions, nor are they attempts to control others. They are quiet declarations of what one will and will not accept, rooted in reason rather than impulse. Many people believe boundaries require long explanations, justifications, or emotional appeals. Stoicism rejects this idea. Explanation invites debate, and debate invites manipulation. A boundary, when truly firm, does not require permission or approval. It exists independently of agreement. The Stoic understands that a boundary is about personal conduct, not another person's behavior. It defines how one will respond, not how others must act. This distinction preserves autonomy. When responsibility remains internal, control remains internal. Drama weakens boundaries. Emotional delivery turns clarity into conflict. When boundaries are set calmly, without anger or resentment, they carry authority. Calm signals certainty. Certainty discourages challenge. Toxic people often test boundaries repeatedly, searching for emotional reactions. Calm consistency ends the test. Consistency is more important than intensity. A boundary enforced once but abandoned later loses credibility. Stoicism emphasizes steady alignment between words and actions. When consequences follow quietly and predictably, manipulation loses leverage. There is no need for warnings or repeated explanations. Applying consequences does not require hostility. Distance can be created without resentment. Access can be limited without punishment. The Stoic does not seek revenge. The Stoic seeks order. Order protects peace. Another Stoic insight is that boundaries protect both parties. They prevent resentment from building and reduce opportunities for conflict. Clear limits reduce confusion. Ambiguity invites misuse. By defining limits early and maintaining them, unnecessary friction is avoided. Boundaries also reinforce self-trust. Each time a limit is honored, confidence grows. Self-respect becomes habitual. Toxic behavior often preys on doubt and hesitation. Strong boundaries eliminate both. It is important to recognize that boundaries may provoke resistance. This is not a sign of failure. Resistance reveals expectations of access that were never earned. The Stoic remains unmoved by protests because validation is not required to uphold principle. Stoicism teaches that discomfort is sometimes necessary to preserve integrity. Setting boundaries may feel uncomfortable at first, especially for those accustomed to pleasing others. Yet temporary discomfort prevents long-term emotional harm. Boundaries also reduce emotional exhaustion. Without them, energy is constantly drained by repeated violations. With them, mental space is protected. Focus returns to what truly matters. The Stoic does not announce boundaries dramatically. They are revealed through behavior. When a limit is crossed, action follows. No lecture, no argument, just alignment. This approach shifts power dynamics naturally. When manipulation fails to produce reaction or access, it loses purpose. Toxic behavior often fades when it no longer works. Importantly, boundaries are flexible when guided by reason. They are not rigid rules enforced blindly. They adapt to circumstances while remaining anchored in core values. This balance preserves humanity without sacrificing self-respect. Boundaries are also a form of self-care, though Stoicism frames them as self-governance. Governing the self includes governing access to time, energy, and attention. These resources are finite and valuable. When boundaries are respected internally, they are easier to maintain externally. Internal clarity precedes external action. Knowing one's values makes limits obvious. In the Stoic view, boundaries are not walls built in fear. They are lines drawn in wisdom. They do not isolate, they protect. Through calm boundaries, drama dissolves. Through consistency, manipulation weakens. Through self-respect, peace is preserved. This is how Stoicism uses boundaries not as weapons, but as anchors, steady, quiet, and unmovable. Seeing toxic behavior as weakness rather than power is a profound shift in perception, and Stoicism trains the mind to make this shift deliberately. Most people experience harmful behavior as a threat, something intimidating or dominant. Stoicism reframes it as evidence of inner disorder. This reframing does not excuse the behavior, but it removes its emotional authority. A person who is truly strong does not need to belittle, manipulate, provoke, or dominate. Such actions arise from insecurity, fear, and lack of self-control. Stoic philosophy holds that virtue is strength and vice is weakness. When someone acts in harmful ways, they reveal a failure of reason, not superiority. Understanding this immediately alters how their actions are received. When toxic behavior is interpreted as power, it creates fear or anger. Both reactions give influence. When it is recognized as weakness, emotional distance becomes natural. The behavior no longer feels personal. It becomes diagnostic rather than threatening. This perspective shields the mind from unnecessary disturbance. Stoicism encourages viewing people as products of their inner state. Actions reflect character. A disturbed mind produces disturbed behavior. This insight invites calm understanding instead of resentment. Anger often arises from the belief that someone has intentionally wounded us from a position of strength. When that belief dissolves, anger follows. This does not mean tolerating harm or staying close to destructive behavior. Stoicism never asks for endurance of injustice. It asks for clarity without emotional distortion. Seeing weakness clearly allows for rational decisions, creating distance, setting boundaries, or disengaging completely. Another benefit of this view is the reduction of ego conflict. Toxic interactions often become power struggles. Each side attempts to dominate emotionally. Stoicism refuses this game entirely. When behavior is seen as weakness, there is nothing to compete with. The need to win disappears. Compassion may arise from this understanding, but it is a calm compassion, not self-sacrificing pity. It recognizes suffering without absorbing it. Compassion without attachment protects the mind while preserving humanity. This Stoic reframing also protects self-esteem. Insults lose their sting when they are understood as reflections of the speaker's inner turmoil. A stable mind does not project chaos outward. When chaos appears, it reveals its source. By removing the illusion of power from toxic behavior, fear dissolves. Fear thrives on perceived threat. When threat is replaced with understanding, composure returns. Calm becomes possible not through suppression, but through insight. This perspective also prevents overreaction. When behavior is seen clearly, response becomes measured. There is no rush to defend, explain, or retaliate. Decisions are made from reason rather than emotion. Over time, this Stoic lens changes emotional habits. The mind learns not to personalize disorder. Peace becomes resilient. External chaos loses its ability to penetrate. It also reinforces internal standards. Rather than reacting to others' flaws, attention returns to one's own conduct. Stoicism emphasizes living in accordance with virtue regardless of others' behavior. This inward focus strengthens character. Recognizing weakness also reveals limits. A person acting from inner disorder cannot offer stability, fairness, or reason consistently. Expecting such qualities leads to disappointment. Acceptance of limitations prevents repeated harm. Stoicism teaches preparation of the mind. Expecting human imperfection reduces surprise and emotional shock. When poor behavior occurs, it confirms expectation rather than violating it. This mental preparation does not harden the heart, it strengthens it. Strength lies in clarity, not bitterness. In seeing toxic behavior as weakness, the Stoic removes its power to disturb. Influence fades when fear and anger fade. What remains is calm understanding and deliberate choice. This is not detachment from humanity, but mastery of perception. When perception is corrected, emotional balance follows, and in that balance, toxic behavior loses its grip, not because it changes, but because it is seen clearly for what it truly is. Self-mastery is the foundation of Stoic strength, and it is the ultimate defense against toxic influence. External situations change constantly, and people act according to their own inner states. But the Stoic learns that lasting security does not come from controlling the world. It comes from governing the self. When the inner world is ordered, external disorder loses its power. Toxic behavior often succeeds because it exploits emotional reflexes. Anger, fear, the desire to be validated, and the urge to retaliate are all predictable reactions. Stoicism trains awareness of these impulses before they turn into action. This awareness is the first layer of mastery. What is seen clearly cannot dominate unconsciously. The Stoic understands that emotions are natural, but not authoritative. Feeling provoked does not require responding with provocation. Feeling disrespected does not require proving worth. When emotions are observed rather than obeyed, they become manageable. Self-mastery is not suppression, it is intelligent regulation. Discipline strengthens this regulation. Daily attention to thoughts, habits, and values builds resilience. When discipline is consistent, external pressure has little effect. Toxic behavior may appear, but it does not penetrate deeply. The Stoic remains anchored in reason. Self-mastery also involves aligning actions with principles rather than moods. Principles are stable. Moods fluctuate. When conduct is guided by principle, behavior remains steady regardless of provocation. This steadiness creates inner security. Another aspect of self-mastery is independence from approval. Toxic people often manipulate through praise or rejection. When self-worth depends on external validation, vulnerability is created. Stoicism builds self-worth on internal standards, integrity, effort, and consistency. When approval is no longer necessary, manipulation loses leverage. Self-mastery also brings patience. Impulsive reactions promise immediate relief but often create long-term damage. Patience allows space for wiser choices. The Stoic prefers delayed clarity over instant expression. This patience protects reputation, relationships, and peace of mind. The practice of reflection strengthens mastery. Reviewing actions, reactions, and thoughts allows correction without self-criticism. Improvement becomes intentional. Each interaction becomes a lesson rather than a wound. Self-mastery does not mean isolation. It means selective engagement. The Stoic chooses where to invest time and energy. Not every interaction deserves access. This selectivity preserves focus and reduces exposure to unnecessary conflict. Inner peace becomes a byproduct of mastery. Peace is not dependent on favorable circumstances. It arises from confidence in one's ability to respond wisely. This confidence creates calm even in difficult environments. When inner peace is present, toxic behavior loses its effect. Without emotional hooks, manipulation fails. Influence fades naturally. Self-mastery also enhances clarity in decision-making. Without emotional turbulence, boundaries are easier to set, silence is easier to maintain, and distance is easier to choose when necessary. Actions are guided by wisdom rather than reaction. Stoicism teaches that true power is quiet. It does not announce itself or seek dominance. It reveals itself in restraint, consistency, and calm presence. This quiet power is difficult to challenge because it does not depend on external conditions. Over time, self-mastery reshapes identity. One becomes someone who cannot be easily disturbed. This reputation alone discourages toxic engagement. Stability repels chaos. The Stoic path is demanding, but it offers freedom. Freedom from emotional slavery. Freedom from reactive patterns. Freedom from being controlled by others' behavior. When the self is mastered, the world no longer dictates inner experience. Toxic people may exist, but they hold no authority. This is the ultimate Stoic defense, not armor against others, but command over the self, and in that command, peace becomes unshakable.